name is Tom Fowler, and I'll be talking today about taking pictures of the night sky, or astrophotography. A lot of people look through a telescope at the moon or stars and they want to take a picture of what they just saw. So they pull out the nearest camera, which happens to be their phone, and line up the camera with the eyepiece of the telescope, and then go, and everybody hates them. And even worse, they don't get any image. Taking pictures of the night sky is actually pretty easy and doesn't have to be frustrating, but there are some basic differences between what your eye sees and what the camera sees that you need to know. First, cameras can be a lot more sensitive to light than your eye, and you can have them gather light and keep adding to it for a long time. Your eyes can only gather light for a second or so, and then they start all over again. So in the night, a camera can record more light than your eye can. But your eyes can see a much wider range of light than a camera within their limits, which is why astronomy photos always look different from what you see in the eyepiece. Here's an example. This is a picture through a telescope of a small part of the constellation Scorpio, which is in the night sky during summer and fall. The very bright red star on the lower left is Antares, and it is a giant red star, although not as big as it looks in this picture. There are two small star clusters above Antares and to the right bit, and by reference to a star atlas, I can tell that Antares is about 1,000,000 times as bright as some of the fainter stars you can see in this picture. But if you looked at this the same way through a telescope, you wouldn't see most of the faint stars, but you would see Antares and you would see the two star clusters. But Antares wouldn't look that big. It would look like a bright red point of light, not much bigger than the small stars around it. Cameras can't deal with bright well. They make bright stars look big instead, as they spill electrons into the little pixel sensors around them. If a camera could record the dim stars and Antares' true brightness, Antares would be a point of light as bright as a flashlight. You could read a book by the light from this photo. This has real effects in your pictures. Stars and bright nebulas typically oversaturate pictures so that the faint details can be seen. Another problem with cameras running auto exposure is that they work great during the daytime when the light is pretty even, but at night you mostly see bright points of light on a black background, and the camera takes an average which overexposes the object you want. Here is a picture taken with my phone through a telescope eyepiece in December of 2020 when Jupiter and Saturn were close in the sky. This was bright enough that the people noticed it while walking around in the evening. But with auto exposure on, both planets are way overexposed, and it took some manual tuning to get even Saturn to look more normal. And that brings us to our first major step in taking night sky pictures. You will have to learn how to adjust your camera settings. Fortunately, most phone cameras and almost all other cameras allow this now. Open up your phone camera and look for a manual setting or professional settings. Sometimes this is in a little submenu. And from here, you can access all the other settings. You can change exposure time, the sensitivity of the camera, and even your focus manually. And I'll discuss this as we go along. Now, taking pictures with your phone isn't the best way to take night pictures, but it's the camera that most people carry around with them. There are other ways to take night photos, and we'll look at some of them. One big advantage that they have over phone cameras is that they have bigger sensors and can let more light reach those sensors. Here's an example of a typical small camera or phone sensor, and here's a typical camera sensor. Bigger sensors have bigger pixels, which means more photons fall in each sensor. This doesn't just mean that they can see fainter objects, it also means there's more range between light and dark. Here are two photos taken from my suburban backyard, adjusted so that they show about the same exposure. The camera in my phone is first. Notice that the night sky has an overall blue color from an incorrect white balance. It's trying to treat this as a daytime photo. Also, the middle of the picture is slightly lighter than the outer part, so the exposure isn't constant across the whole view. The exposure from the DSLR camera has a dark gray sky and there are more faint stars showing, and there's just a little bit more going on. You can even see faint traces of overhead clouds. Now, here are two photos taken of a night landscape in Italy. This was taken from a mountain. The first is from a phone, and the second's from a DSLR. The exposure times are different, but the overall amount of light is about the same. Notice in the phone picture that everything is either light or dark. There isn't too much shading in between. Even if you're taking a picture of something bright like the moon, having a lot of range means more subtle detail in your picture. With that out of the way, the easiest way to take a night picture is to find some way to prop your camera up, set the mode to manual, set the exposure to its longest setting, usually 30 seconds, 10 to 30 seconds or so, and set the f-stop wide open. Turn the ISO setting up to 800 or higher. This setting is similar to the film speed on older cameras. Very high settings can make the picture brighter but more grainy, so play around a little. Turn the flash off. Set the timer to 10 seconds. That'll keep it from shaking, and press the shutter. Now look at your picture. If it is too bright, reframe it to keep any near features out of the picture, or shorten the shutter speed. If it is not bright enough, try making the ISO higher. If you're maxed out on everything, try taking about 5 or 10 pictures anyway, and we can try stacking them later. The next thing to try is taking a picture through the eyepiece of a telescope, and we're back to autofocus and auto exposure again. If you don't have a way to mount the phone camera right over the eyepiece, look for the cone of light coming out from the eyepiece and put your phone camera lens right over it. Now get the camera square to the eyepiece or it will be half out of focus. Get it right up there and make sure it's nice and square. Now let the camera find its best focus and brightness. Aim for bright areas to stop overexposure and get everything a little darker. Gently touch the shutter button. Now check your picture and try again, trying to correct any errors that you have. That's where we go. Holding the phone over the eyepiece is tricky and frustrating, so the fix is to have a gizmo to hold the camera for you. This one mounts right on the eyepiece, attaches quickly, and you can move the phone side to side, up and down, or even towards the eyepiece and away from it. This lets you frame the picture better. You can make adjustments easier and get more good pictures. Extending this idea to a point-and-shoot camera, you can take a point-and-shoot gizmo. You can point the camera down the eyepiece, and if your camera has a zoom feature, it will give you a bigger image than a phone camera. I took this picture of the moon with a 6-megapixel camera over 15 years ago using a telescope and a camera support. Even with only a 5-power zoom, it made the images a lot larger. So far I've been talking about pictures of the moon and a few planets like Jupiter and Saturn. That's because these objects are so bright that you can use shutter speeds of a fraction of a second, and you don't have to worry about the object moving through the eyepiece. Here's a movie I took of what the moon looks like without a motor to guide your telescope. You're seeing real vibration and atmospheric effects blurring the image. To take pictures of deeper sky objects like star clusters, nebulas, and galaxies, you will have to work with bigger sensors, bigger lenses, and a clock drive for your tripod that will track the sky as the Earth turns. Many astronomy tripods come with tracking motor drives, but if all you need to do is track the sky, companies offer a tracking head that follows the sky with a mount for a camera without the other equipment. The first step in this direction is a DSLR camera. It has a bigger sensor, it lets more light reach that sensor, and it can mount to anything from wide-angle lenses, telephoto, or to telescopes. If you're thinking, that's too expensive for me, there are plenty of perfectly good older DSLRs at second-hand stores and yard sales for as little as $50. A DSLR can take night sky pictures with ordinary lenses, but if you want to mount it to a telescope, you will need something called a T-adapter and a ring that fits your camera. This lets the camera sit nice and snug in the eyepiece tube. Again, you will need to work with manual settings. Set it to manual and B or bulb, and you can hold the shutter open for as long as your battery holds out. With a good steady tracking tripod, 2 to 5 minute exposures are possible, and a remote release keeps vibration down. Finally, you can do away with everything but the sensor itself and let your computer do all the work. These are dedicated sky cameras, and they don't have any lenses or any way to focus them. You mount them right on the telescope like an eyepiece. They're lighter than a DSLR and more sensitive and have less noise in the exposure. They can range from a common webcam up to a very expensive model with cooling circuits and fans. In fact, you can make a perfectly good one from a webcam if you remove the focus lens and mount it on a little 1.5-inch tube to fit in the eyepiece. You can use free software to gather the exposures and more free software to stack all the images together to actually get a better picture than a DSLR can get. Those really nice pictures of space that you see online and in magazines, they're shot this way. To recap, start simple. Use your phone and my advice to shoot better pictures of twilight and the moon. Get a telescope if you can, and make your images large. If you want to shoot the deep sky, you can buy a tracking mount or even a tripod. At each level, there is plenty of room for growth and creativity. The challenge is to see things in your camera that are once-in-a-lifetime events or that are too faint for your eye to see.